what's up you guys, the Curious Owl here, and today I have my January 2022 wrap-up. The first month of the year is completed, the first round of Battle of the Bookish for the year is also completed, and I completed my entire TBR for Battle of the Bookish, so I am feeling very proud of myself, like more than I expected to get through this month, considering that for the first 2 weeks I was pretty much in a slump. I had a lot of things happen in the beginning of this month that were really difficult for me to deal with. If you watched any of the vlogs I did over the course of the month, you would know that not only did I have the remembrance of my grandfather who passed away 11 years ago this year come upon me, that was very traumatic, more so this year than it was any other time, other than when he had originally passed away. And then on the 5th of January, I had to put both of my pet rats down, which was also very difficult for me to deal with because it was just so emotionally traumatic. It just really stunk to have to deal with that because it was not something that I was ready for by any means. However, later in the month, we ended up getting our first dog, Oscar, and I also have footage of that you guys will be able to see. And he has been, in just the short time that he's been here, the light of my life. He is just an absolute joy. I love him so very much, and I'm so excited to see him grow up because honestly, this is in a lot of ways, I think, similar to how I feel, I will be when I become a mother to, an actual human child. But Oscar is for sure my baby, and nobody is going to be able to tell me different because I love this little bundle of joy so much. Anyway, so over the course of the month, I did complete 10 books, and I'm very proud of myself because, like I said, the first 2 weeks were really rough, and I was not expecting to get through any, if at all, of my TBR, and I managed to do it. Let's go into the stats for this month. So in total, I read 3,534 pages, and we're going to kind of see over the course of this year whether or not I can match that in terms of like every month, or if there seems to be a trend where I like have a kind of an average that I will typically read. I had no minutes worth of audiobooks because while I did listen to some audiobooks of the books I read, I really just focused on counting the physical books pages because I primarily was reading those, and the audiobooks just helped me kind of get through some of the day with work and stuff, and for some of these was really helpful with helping to establish the world within some of the fantasy books I read. Out of all the books I read, all of them were physical. I had no ebooks or audiobooks that I counted for this month. 9 of the books I read were personal, from my personal library, and 1 was borrowed from my local library. Now going into the star ratings, I had 4 5-star reads, 3 4-star reads, and 3 3-star reads. I had no 2 stars, no 1 stars, and no DNFs. So let's start off with the book that took me the longest to get through, which was for the first 11 days, I think, of the year, and that was The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan, the first book in the Wheel of Time series. I do have a dedicated video for this for a review if you would like to check it out, but to make a long story short, I gave this 4 stars. I really enjoyed it, especially because this was a reread for me. Listening to the audiobook while reading this, I think really helped shape this story so much more for me than I had been able to grasp the first time. And I think that the only reason I took so long with this was because, like I said, the beginning of the month was really rough for me emotionally, that it caused me to go into a bit of a slump because I had no energy or motivation to read. So that's kind of more so why it took longer for me to get through this. Now, this didn't necessarily count originally for anything that was going to be for Battle of the Bookish, but I did end up actually being able to get this to count for my ISIS prompt, for my Team Egyptian prompt, which was to read a fantasy. The next book I read was Cycle of the Werewolf by Stephen King. This is a novella, and I gave this 3 stars, and I have also a review video for this that you can go check out, but wasn't too bad. But I definitely am not as big of a fan of novellas, I think, in general, unless they are a part of already well-established novel-based series. I found this to be like interesting in concept, but I think it should have just been like a full-fledged novel as opposed to a novella, because it was kind of disappointing with the lack of things that we learned over the course of the book. Cycle of the Werewolf was being counted as my just read a book prompt for the Battle of the Bookish general prompts. The next 2 books I read were part of a graphic novel series, and that is the Critical Role Vox Machina Origins Volumes 1 and 2 by Matthew Mercer and a host of other artists, writers, a bunch of different people. Basically, these are collections of the origin stories of the characters within the Vox Machina D&D campaign team that we have. Now, if you're a fan of Critical Role, these are very, very fun to read, especially if you're fans of the Vox Machina series, because I am, and I found so much enjoyment out of this because basically this helps paint the story of what was done before the live streams were created for Vox Machina back in 2015. These basically help outline the characters themselves in the first volume actually getting together to meet a common goal, and then in volume 2 they have an actual first mission that they go on together, and we kind of see one character that we hadn't met as of yet finally come in to the troupe and join their team to create essentially what we know as Vox Machina today. I love these both so much. They were so great, and I'm so happy to see that, you know, because Matthew Mercer was involved in the creation of these, that they were just so authentic, I think, to the story and the way that the story was told. So 5 stars to both of these for sure. The first volume was going to be counting for the general prompt to read a book with pictures, and volume 2 was going to be for the Egyptian team's prompt of Bastet, which was to read a book with an animal companion, as one of the main characters in the Vox Machina campaign has an animal companion bear named Trinket. The next book I read was Cleopatra VII, Daughter of the Nile, Egypt 57 BC, written by Christiana Gregory. Now, this is basically part of the Royal Diary series, which was a series I very, very fondly remember of from my childhood. This is basically a historical fictionalized diary of what somebody thinks Cleopatra might have written during a very specific time in their life. This takes place between her ages of 12, I think, to about 14 or 15. And it basically goes through the story of how Cleopatra, at the very beginning, her father has been nearly assassinated and essentially has to go away into hiding. And she is having to deal with an older sister who is trying to kill her to get the throne. And you start to see that Cleopatra is very smart. You see that she's actually starting to be able to gain favor in the kingdom, and it's kind of her trying to figure out what is she going to be able to do to not only survive but also be able to rule effectively in her father's place if she has to. I really love this because I think it was really interesting to kind of think about how exactly Cleopatra in a more modern sense would kind of dictate her own story. I gave this a 3 out of 5 star though, because I felt that the way it was kind of stopped at the very end was really abrupt. There wasn't really much to go off of, and I don't know, just some things about the way that Cleopatra was described definitely did not fit, I think, her age. But then again, you know, thinking on it, people that were 12 years old back in her time period were very different than 12-year-olds now, and that's something that is very hard for me sometimes to kind of put distance with. I liked it, but I definitely feel like it's not something I would have picked up on my own as an adult. This is definitely more of a nostalgic read for me, and as much as I would love to read the rest of the series and like rest of the Royal Diaries, I don't think that they're gonna wow me by any means. It's gonna be more for pure nostalgia and being able to kind of relive some favorite books of mine from when I was a child. Cleopatra VII was for one of my Team Egyptian prompts, which was for Seth, which was to read a book in a tropical or hot area. The next book I completed was Magic Lessons by Alice Hoffman. This is the prequel story to essentially the entire story of Practical Magic. Now, there are 4 books in the series, 2 of them being before Practical Magic, this one and another one called The Rules of Magic. Magic Lessons follows essentially the first woman to set the curse on the Owens women family, which is named Maria, and we basically learn from her birth up until she is an adult, essentially, what goes on in her life, how she's adopted by a witch in this area in England, and how she basically moves herself out to Salem, Massachusetts, where we kind of learn more about her in the actual story of Practical Magic, or at least in the movie, because I think that the movie must have really gotten things wrong, because also according to my mother, who has read Practical Magic, there have been a lot of things that they've changed from the book to the movie, which makes this, I think, interesting because I've not read the book as of yet for Practical Magic, since I'm starting kind of timeline-wise, chronologically. So I found that there were some things that could be inconsistencies that I'm going to be looking for in Practical Magic itself. But overall, I really, really like this. I feel, though, that some of the magic and witchcraft aspects that were involved in this were very Wiccanized. I do have a part of a vlog where I kind of delve more into this, but to keep it short and simple, I feel like that there is this really awful thing that has happened with witchcraft where it is very whitewashed and very Wiccanized, meaning that essentially that witchcraft is pretty much always diluted to only Wicca-based practices, and that is not always the case. And I feel like that was really emphasized here with some of the things that were involved with the witchcraft in here, in terms of how things were done, spells, ceremonies, things of that nature. It just didn't really offer much in terms of diversity of different kinds of cultures involved in witchcraft, things of that nature. I thought that the plot was amazing. I really loved seeing Maria grow as an individual. I just felt that the overall witchcraft aspect was not where I would have wanted it to be as a practicing witch myself. So go into it with that mindset if you are also a practicing witch, that it is not very diverse, it is very Wiccanized kind of ideas. But overall, aside from that, it is a very well done story. It is very well crafted. I really enjoyed my time with this and gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. Magic Lessons was for the prompt Ra for the Egyptian team, which was to read a book with yellow or gold or orange on the cover. The next book I read was another 5-star read, which is probably not going to really surprise anybody, but it is the Critical Role Vox Machina Kith and Kin. Basically, this is the origin story of 2 of the characters from Vox Machina before we even see what we have in the graphic novel that I had talked about earlier. This is basically how 2 of the characters who are a set of twins named Vax'ildan and Vex'ahlia Vesar essentially start going on their own and campaigning for themselves, basically. This was written by Marieke Nijkamp, who is a huge Critical Role fan, and as I had watched an interview with her and the 2 people that played the characters in the Dungeons & Dragons campaign, I found that this was just so well done, and it is very apparent that these characters were taken in with so much love and care. It is very apparent to me that Marieke really made sure to be careful with writing these characters, as they were very well established. They have a very, set way of things, and the fact that there was so much work put in by Laura and Liam themselves, the people that play the actual characters in the campaign, it made, I think, this story just so much better, and I feel like this really exemplifies so many of the amazing qualities about both of these characters that it basically just completely emphasizes my love for the both of them. Vax'ildan is one of my favorite characters of all time. I cannot ever get enough of him, truthfully. This one, though, was just so absolutely stunning in terms of writing, and I think just overall plot construction. It was very interesting to see a story of these 2 characters that I did not expect to really come in at any point, and I just really appreciated being able to learn so much too about the history of these 2 characters, because not only do we have a situation that they both have to handle as 2 young adult elves on their own, half-elves on their own, but we also get to learn a lot about how they were basically taken in by their elven father, who was very domineering, was very much somebody who instilled in them a hatred for their own kind because of the fact that they were very kind of classist and racist in a sense, where like the elves were very much disdainful of the halflings, and so it was very apparent that there was a lot of issues seated in that, and I really appreciated that exploration, especially on Vax'ildan's part, because I feel like we've always known in the campaign, that he has a very strong dislike for his father, and we never really 100% knew why. Like, we had some inklings about it in the campaign, but to see it actually kind of come to fruition in this was absolutely wonderful. So no surprise, I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. Easily my most favorite read of the year so far. This one was for my LGBTQ prompt for one of the general prompts of the readathon. The next book I read was a reread and was for the reread prompt for the general prompts, and that was for The Hating Game by Sally Thorne. This is an adult romance. I just feel like I absolutely loved so much more the second time. I actually ended up giving this a 5 out of 5 stars as well, compared to the first time I read it with giving it a 4-star. This was just absolutely amazing, I feel like, because I just understood the male love interest so much more. I found a lot more appreciation for him in terms of kind of why he is the way he is. And I feel like he's been done dirty a lot of times, and it does not surprise me why Josh is somebody who is very not trusting of people. I totally get it now. I understand it so much more now than I think I ever did before. And Lucy, I think this time around was really funny to me. I just think she's absolutely hilarious because she is very much, I think, me in a lot of ways. And I just feel like the relationship between these two, I've picked up so much more also because it's a very sub-dom relationship. And I don't know what it is, but that kind of thing just makes me very happy to see. Like, the fact that I can recognize that kind of a relationship in people it's just hilarious to me, and I really, really enjoyed it. The next book I read was Spirit Bound by Richelle Mead. This is book 5 in the Vampire Academy series, and I have a review video for this as well. But long and short of it, 4 out of 5 stars, really enjoyed it. Not as much as I think the other 2 books that I've read in this series that were kind of preluding this one, which were Shadow Kiss and Blood Promise. I feel like this one really dragged in a lot of places, but I overall really enjoyed what there was. There also, though, was this whole aspect of the plot that I thought was going to be a lot bigger that never really came to fruition. And I was a little disappointed by it, but I think that that's because it's going to be something that's going to come up much more in the final book in this series. But I'll save that for the rest of the review for you guys to go watch if you would like to hear my thoughts on it. But for the readathon, this was for the prompt for Team Egyptian Osiris, which was to read a book involving death. And finally, the last book that I read this month, which is downstairs, and I don't really want to go downstairs to get it, it was Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. This is a classic story based in the Civil War where it follows basically a family that involves 4 young women, and it's basically just a story of following them as they're growing up and dealing with a lot of different things. Their father is currently out at battle. He is a chaplain and is helping take care of the soldiers, and it's essentially them just living their lives. They meet a young man by the name of Laurie who essentially just befriends all 4 of the sisters, and you see like their whole relationship with him bloom. And it's a lot of story about family, love, war, you know, struggling through hard times, but at the end of the day, relying on your family and, you know, how amazing family can be when you have a family such as the Marches. It actually reminded me a lot of how very different the sisters in Pride and Prejudice were from each other, and I think that that was very easily like something that could have inspired Louisa for this story. But I just really appreciated how there were a lot of really sad points in the story, but it brought about some very interesting conversations within the girls themselves, who were essentially from the ages of 12 to 16 going on 17. And it just was really interesting to kind of see this story that I quite honestly can see is a very timeless piece. I definitely understand why a lot of people enjoy this, and especially why they cling so much to one of the siblings. But at the same time, it was kind of a lot of nothing for me. Like, I felt like as much as it was a character-driven story, I didn't 100% connect with any of the sisters, and I just didn't feel like I got a lot out of it. Like, I'm glad that I've read it. I'm definitely very happy that I finally read this story. I definitely, like I said, understand why everyone seems to love this as a classic story. But I didn't really get a whole heck of a lot out of it, and I feel like I'm not any better for having read it. I'm not any worse for, you know, having read it. I don't know. I'm just kind of lukewarm about it, truthfully. But I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars because it wasn't bad. I just didn't really seem to have much of an emotional aspect to it, as I know a lot of people have with this. This was to complete my final prompt I needed for the Battle of the Bookish, which was to read a TBR veteran. So those are all the books I ended up reading this month. I am very proud of myself. Like I said, I completed all of the books I wanted to on my TBR, and I just feel like I won. As much as this month was kind of a pain for me in some ways, I feel like I really won. So I can't ask for more than that. But thank you guys so much for joining me in this video. If you guys did enjoy this video, please do give it a big thumbs up. And if you haven't already and you'd like to be and would like to see more content like this, go ahead and hit that button down below and subscribe to become an owlet in our flock. And I will see all of you guys in my next video. Bye guys!